Alright, before I start this video, I'd just like to preface this with a disclaimer. For those who are still studying for the upcoming licensure exams, whether it be for pharmacy or any board exam that involves drugs, I recommend you click away right now because this content might confuse your studying even more. Alright, we good? So for the board season for, at least for the past few months, it's finished now, and I know many are very tempted to put away their reviewers, their handouts. I know I'd be too, but humor me for just a bit longer because I've been hovering around study circles online on Twitter, and I've noticed all the notes and mnemonics and threads being passed around. But there are quite a few things that are. It's not the it's not, of course, it's not the, well, now soon to be registered professionals' fault. It's not their fault because that's what was taught to them, what that they had to study for exams in school, and now for their upcoming licensure exams. And so, as we move forward, I think, before we fully move forward, I think we really ought to look back and check out, is everything we studied for the boards actually worth remembering? I'm not saying that these are the things that actually came out during the boards. That would be illegal. Remember the thing you signed. You cannot just tell people what the exam questions are, right? But for sure you study these things, and I think it's a good idea we look back and check which of these we should probably delete from our stock knowledge. So, without further ado, here are 10 things that you studied for the boards that may be outdated or even wrong. Let's get to it with the first one. Tacrine. I've seen this a lot, not just in pharmacy actually, and it's pretty disappointing that we're still seeing this. It's actually weird that Tacrine is still being brought up now, especially looky here. Sorry, I keep pointing in the wrong direction with this software. Tacrine was withdrawn from the worldwide market several years ago already. Why? Because apparently, if you will zoom in closer here, huge chunk of people, close to half, who took Tacrine, supposedly it was the first one discovered for Alzheimer's, yeah, but close to half of people who would take Tacrine would see abnormalities in their liver function test. It's a pretty hepatotoxic drug. And that's why we no longer use it. And to see it still being taught as a drug you would realistically use for Alzheimer's? Really? No. Okay, now that our high-stakes exams are done for the meantime, at least, please delete this. Please just, imagine recommending Tacrine for Alzheimer's. That's cringe, bro. That's cringe. Never catch me doing that. Not me. Couldn't be me. Okay, so no more Tacrine. Okay, get rid of that. Next up, this one, I see this a lot for the, because heart failure therapeutics is pretty tricky. A lot of meds are involved. So try to remember all of the specific ones as much as possible. And particularly for beta blockers, there are only very specific beta blockers used in heart failure. The problem is, well, the lists I saw, one kept coming back and again and again and again when it never really belonged there in the first place. Talking about Nebivolol. If you look at all of the guidelines, even the latest ones from the American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, the latest ones this year for heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, nowhere here do you see Nebivolol as a recommended beta blocker. Actually, the reason is Nebivolol did have a clinical trial for heart failure, but it never really made the cut in terms of outcomes. I mean, you could keep pushing it. Yes, it's a vasoconstricting beta blocker. I don't give a damn. Right? Clinical trials show it didn't make the cut. So yeah, study it for the high stakes exams, for the boards, whatever. Now that if you're done, chuck it in the bin. Okay? It's only metoprolol succinate, specifically succinate, not tartrate. Metoprolol succinate, bisoprolol, carvedilol. Alright? Forget Nebivolol. Edrophonium. One of the first drugs actually you learn in pharmacology Supposedly, the gold standard in the diagnosis, supposedly, of myasthenia gravis, an autoimmune disease affecting the neuromuscular junction, antibodies start eating the acetylcholine receptors, blah, blah, blah. Right? What's the problem here? We've seen, the thing is, and I'm thankful to my friend who brought this up to me, actually. We've seen emerging data, and it's not just recently, more than 5 years ago already, that it's not really as good at its job as it claims to be. Because when you talk about diagnosis, you want to make sure you don't get any false flags, false positives, false negatives. You want to make sure if the test turns positive, you're actually positive. If the test turns negative, you're actually negative. I guess a good example would be drug tests. Imagine our urine drug tests, right? And like you take some ibuprofen, and then suddenly you get your test results and it tests positive for shabu. You never really took shabu. So that's called that's a false positive. So you see the problem when tests that give you positive results are actually just false positives. I mean, that's a more extreme example because urine drug tests are really bad tests. But, when it comes to diagnosing a condition like myasthenia gravis, or any condition really, you want to make sure you have good sensitivity, specificity, and all of that stuff you learned in in analytical chemistry. Right? So, because of that, in 2018, the FDA removed Edrophonium from the U.S. market. I'm not really sure if it was the company that asked for the recall or the FDA initiated the recall, but whatever. It's gone from the U.S. market. It's no longer in the Philippine market. It probably was in the past, but now it's not. If you check the FDA website, nowadays, what do they use? They use antibody tests to check again if the antibodies against the receptors are detectable in the blood, along with, of course, you don't just, if you think about it also with diagnostics, our doctor friends would understand this better, and as well as psychologists, even, you're not supposed to be relying on just one source of info. You gotta integrate that results from antibody tests with clinical observation, maybe running some other tests as well, and put that together, right? And, over-reliance on one test that was never really good to begin with, not a good idea. Okay, so Edrophonium, you are free to delete it. I mean, it had another use, right? For reversal of neuromuscular blockade, but we have neostigmine in the Philippines, and we don't have Edrophonium. So just you can chuck this in the bin. Somehow it feels sentimental, but it's just taking up useless brain space. Not worth keeping. Right. Now, this one, I see this a lot. Negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Very important but often neglected area in the treatment of schizophrenia. And a lot of the notes I've seen often point to, or even textbooks I've seen point to, atypical second-generation antipsychotics being better than first-generation in treating negative symptoms. I know whose fault this is. I know which book is at fault here. The truth is, if you look at the meta-analyses, particularly that by Fusser-Polly et al. In 2015, no single drug has been able to demonstrate clinically significant benefits in terms of primary negative symptoms of schizophrenia. When we say primary, we mean the negative symptoms that are due to the schizophrenia disorder process itself. The underlying pathology. So no drug has actually demonstrated clinically significant benefit there. Not even clozapine. Actually, clozapine is good at what it does, right? But in terms of secondary, because you say secondary negative symptoms, those are, due to causes outside of the condition. So for example, D2 receptor antagonism. You block D2 receptors in the mesolimbic pathway, that will cause negative symptoms. They used to call it neuroleptic-induced deficit syndrome, but basically that's due to very potent D2 receptor antagonism by first-gen antipsychotics or the typical antipsychotics. Atypicals, so-called atypicals or the second-generation antipsychotics, those are better if you want to avoid secondary negative symptoms, if you want to avoid negative symptoms from the drug itself. But if you're talking about treating, if you're talking about treating primary negative symptoms, we don't have options for that. Absolutely none. And if you don't want to take my word for it, you can take this infographic made by one of our board top-notchers, announced earlier yesterday. I should be publishing it the next day. Yeah, so congratulations to the one behind Art Hero. Congrats, Rendsborg. Woo! Yes, so listen to the top-notcher. He knows what he's talking about. Anyway, right. Now, TCAs. TCAs for Nocturnal enuresis, bedwetting. Wait, teka lang muna. I also came across this when I was, studying for boards myself, and, I didn't think to question it at the time. You'd be surprised with the amount of information we just accept because, it's taught to us, right? But when you look at it, TCAs, the therapeutic index for TCAs is really narrow, and I don't know why we never stopped to question why we would use these narrow therapeutic index drugs on children. Because this is usually used in kids who still who have difficulty with bedwetting at night, right? And why would you use TCAs right off the bat for that? And when I looked into the data, it turns out it isn't even close to first line, not even second line. It's actually something you'd reserve for specialists. Third line option, actually. And the first two options you would consider: alarms, whether it be sound alarms, auditory, or vibration alarms. So you can help the person bedwetting wake up as soon as the bedwetting is starting to happen, so they can control it and get used to waking up, and to prevent that. If that's not cutting it, or it's not something they're amenable to, you have the drug option, desmopressin. We do have desmopressin in the Philippines. So those are your first two options, actually. So probably depending on cost, the only thing that might have you choose a TCA if the alarm doesn't work is cost. But even then, TCAs are also pretty pricey. So yeah, no. Anxiety disorders. Normal anxiety, please don't try to pathologize that. I know a lot of you were anxious for board exam results. That is normal anxiety. If you watched Inside Out, anxiety is an emotion. It is a normal human emotion. But we are not talking about treating normal human emotions. We're talking about anxiety disorder, specifically generalized anxiety disorder. Sino nga ba talaga ang first line? Some will say benzos, others will say buspirone. First of all, we don't have buspirone. Second of all, buspirone takes 6 weeks to work. Matagal. Okay, matagal. And there's really, and well, second to the fact that it's not even available. Right? So what do we have in the Philippines that is safer than benzos, long-term, and is actually recommended as first line? That would be your SSRIs. Yes, they are antidepressants, but they work for so many things. Binge eating disorder, bulimia nervosa, postmenopausal hot flashes, and anxiety disorders like GAD. They are first line there. Yeah, they take 4 weeks at minimum to work, but they're safer than benzos, and we actually have them, right? So yeah, okay. Not buspirone, not benzos, SSRIs po ang first line. Now, okay, I do not want to fill in the redacted parts of this because I had a horrifying realization of what I could put at the end of status epilepticus. But anyway, reoccurring high-stakes exam question: what exactly is the first line for status epilepticus? And I know I made a video for this already, but I wanted to highlight because, there's been a lot of discussion on this. We don't have lorazepam in the Philippines. Let's get that out of the way. We don't have lorazepam in the Philippines. I remember the first time I entered the hospital, and I remember asking my seniors there, saan ba yung lorazepam? And they just looked at me like, I want to spare you that experience. Okay? I made the mistake. You don't need to make it if ever you decide to, start working in these settings. There is no lorazepam in the Philippines. It was already delisted from the Philippine National Formulary, 8th edition, and it is not even registered with the FDA. What do we have? In the Philippines, we have diazepam. So the American Epilepsy Society, yes, it recommends IV, intravenous diazepam as first line. Talk to my friend. That's the one they routinely use. Actually, for seizures lasting longer than 5 minutes. So usually you might not want to wait until 5 minutes. Maybe after 2 minutes, start giving something, But we have other options. This is my favorite thing to talk about. Okay, so we always talk about, IV diazepam. Yeah, it's a first-line option for sure. But what if you don't have IV access? And again, we don't have lorazepam. So what can we do? Well, way back 10 years ago, they did a clinical trial for this. IV lorazepam versus imidazolam. The beauty of imidazolam is when it's hot, it doesn't degrade. IV lorazepam, when it's hot, it degrades. So, great if you need something in a pinch and you don't have to worry about cold chain storage. And at the same time, not only was imidazolam non-inferior to IV lorazepam, there was even a hint that it might be better. I'm not saying it is, I'm saying it might be better. So in terms of options, if there's an IV line already available, IV diazepam, it works, first line. But if there's no IV line and you're worried about temperature control, imidazolam is a perfectly suitable first-line option. So the answer is dalawa sila. Okay, that's why drug of choice is such a basurang concept. It's a garbage trash concept because in practice, you have to tailor your options depending on the individual situation of the patient, right? So imidazolam, IV, diazepam, both of these will work. Okay, speaking of the problem with seizures lasting longer than 5 minutes is the first drug you give will often not work. In many cases, like about more or less half. I forgot the exact number. But yeah, what do you do then? Right? So what is your second line option after the benzo fails? Whether it be imidazolam, IV, diazepam. And guidelines will recommend, yes, Phenytoin. Phenytoin specifically, but in the Philippines, I guess, we only have Phenytoin. And it is used for status epilepticus. But in 2019, they did a clinical trial to check. Do we have alternative options? Maybe options as less intense compared to Phenytoin? Because Phenytoin is pretty difficult to use. There are so many contraindications and side effects aren't really very nice. And what did they find? Phenytoin versus levetiracetam versus valproate, they all worked about the same when you add them to a benzo. And levetiracetam has less contraindications. So if the patient can afford it and it's accessible to you, why not just go levet? And specifically, I would see Phenytoin recommended for focal seizures. Please don't, okay? Carbamazepine is cheap. And if you're not able to do genetic testing or check for the HLA-B1502, to avoid SJS10 and Han Chinese, then you also have lamotrigine. And those are both perfectly acceptable first-line options for focal seizures. Please don't use partial anymore, okay? So maybe steer clear of the Phenytoin if you can. It's a very heavy drug. And for people who are on it and it works, of course, don't change that, don't touch that, of course. But, new patients, you have options. You have newer options and also cheap. They're also cheap. Carbamazepine is pretty cheap. Yeah. Now, this one, perennial, okay. Absence seizures, Ethosuximide. Absence seizures, Ethosuximide. The question is, do we have Ethosuximide? We don't. Even our local primary care guidelines acknowledge this. This one, I'm very proud. Of course, I guess disclosure of conflict of interest. I did help write this, but this is for the DOH. And I never received any money from pharmaceutical companies when working on this. So you can trust I unbiasedly do support valproate used first line. There are clinical trials to support valproate is as efficacious for absence seizures. And if you can't use valproate, lamotrigine is also okay. There are just more patients develop attentional dysfunction, while lamotrigine for absence seizures. But, it's a second line option. But at least we have them. Okay, we don't have Ethosuximide, and it might be really pricey to import it when we have equally efficacious options in the Philippines. So, yeah. Top 10 anime betrayals. Like, when I found out, it was like... And lastly, every time I mention this in front of a nephrologist, I feel like my professional reputation goes down by 10 points. Like, I'm embarrassed even saying it out loud. The Demeclocycline for basta, yan. Okay, I don't want to say it anymore. Breathe. First of all, we don't have it. Second of all, it's pretty trash. It's not just the guidelines are pretty much phased this out, and yeah, we have options. I have even styled the options in the format of the Lost comic, so you will never forget. Fluid restriction, of course, being first line, and if that doesn't work out, tolvaptan. Right? Tolvaptan, though, is pretty pricey. It's very pricey. So, yeah. Just a heads up there. And this is not to mention all of the other things that you will eventually find out. 99% of the barbiturates don't exist in the Philippines. Half the benzos. All of the ganglionic blockers are pretty much useless because they have been phased out worldwide. So, all of these, as you learn, entering into a future professional role, get ready to be frustrated at the amount of useless information you had to study, but at the very least, I wanted to get out of the way the most egregious ones. And, whatever direction you decide to go in your career path, I wish you all the best. Hopefully you can, as you move forward, throw these out. Get rid of these. They're useless baggage, trivia, whatever, historical. Okay, chupi. Bye-bye. And... you got this, right? So, yes, this is my content for now. For those who made it, good job. For those who didn't, I am rooting for you for the next attempts and wishing you all the best, regardless of what you decide to do now. Take care.